9 U.S. presidents assassinated by the globalists. By Larry Engel.
Hello folks, I am Larry Engel. This is Article 26. I call it the overview. I make the incredible claim that 20 U.S. presidents were assassinated by the globalists in order to take over the money and credit of the nation. This article and videotape are an overview of those events, a summary of the whole bunch. These are my observations, my intuition, and my opinion. Feel free to disagree if you care to. President George Washington was killed by his doctors, who removed 1/2 of his blood. Was this a medical incompetence or an intentional murder, one might ask? But I would instead ask, was he a target of the European banking cartel? One of his doctors was the head of the Masonic Lodge in his area, and the other, at one time, had been a British Army officer. Modern doctors confirm that Washington died by the actions of his doctors, not by natural causes. Of the first 5 presidents, 3 of them died on the 4th of July. Now, would you believe that that's a coincidence? Would you believe that? Mathematical scientists tell us that the chance of that happening is astronomical. That didn't happen. They were assassinated.
Sherlock Holmes noted that the insane use of power never happens by chance, from the story, The Cardboard Box.
What object is served by this circle of misery and violence and fear? It must tend to some end, or else our universe is ruled by chance, which is unthinkable.
But there are strong reasons why the banker globalists would target President John Adams, President Thomas Jefferson, and President James Monroe. The choice of the date, when America celebrates its independence, as the time to cause the deaths of these presidents and our founding fathers, would be a decision made because it sends a message, a malignant message, to other American leaders.
Sherlock Holmes warns us that a certain kind of criminal can obscure a crime.
When a doctor does go wrong, he is the first of criminals. He has the nerve and he has the knowledge.
Controlled historians tell us that the Revolutionary War was fought against the British. However, the British from the time of King Henry VIII and all of England itself was taken over and ruled by the Lombard bankers out of Geneva, Switzerland, and the rest of Europe also. Ben Franklin tells us that the cause of the Revolutionary War was that the bankers acted to prevent the American colonies from printing their own money. So why wasn't 4th President James Madison assassinated if Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Monroe were? Did Madison, who dearly loved this nation, do something that influenced the bankers not to assassinate him? In that day, and even today, not many people understand that a country can be conquered by banking experts when they take over the money and credit of a nation.
You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear.
This is a Sherlock Holmes quote from A Scandal in Bohemia.
During the War of 1812, Washington, D.C. and the White House were burned to the ground by the British Army. President Madison had to flee for his life. America's first bank, established by Alexander Hamilton, was not the evil central bank of issue. Its 20-year charter was due to expire in 1812. The nation's money under Hamilton's bank was not paper, but gold and silver coins, and Hamilton's bank's debts were placed on the stockholders or owners of the bank, and not on the people. Nor did it produce a national debt. Bond issues paid the nation's debts as the nation grew. However, that second bank of the United States was an evil thing, which President Madison was forced to approve. It tried to conquer and take over the nation until President Andrew Jackson killed it. So Madison was not targeted for assassination because he had given the globalists the bank they wanted. But poor Madison was compromised and in danger of being murdered, as had been the other 4 presidents of the original 5 presidents.
The great detective Sherlock Holmes once said,
"I never guess. It is a shocking habit, destructive to the logical faculty."
President John Quincy Adams was compromised by the murder of his father, President John Adams, and also Thomas Jefferson on the same day, only 6 months after he took office. Now, as Secretary of State, he had been a very strong enforcer of the Monroe Doctrine against the European powers. But as president, his foreign policy was weak and almost non-existent. Was he scared that they would kill him and the justice system fail? The next president, Andrew Jackson, said he killed the bank. They tried to assassinate him, but by some miracle the balls did not come out of the 2 pistols, which were fired at point blank. But the shooter and President Jackson himself said that the Rothschild bankers had ordered the president's assassination. The next president assassinated was General William Henry Harrison, who had fought the British and their allies, the Indians, and he had thoroughly beat them. The bankers considered Harrison a very dangerous enemy. A deathbed confession indicates that Skull and Bones poisoned Harrison, who died after only 32 days in office. The official story of Harrison's death is a hoax. Then Vice President John Tyler became president, but only after a fight that tried to block him. Acting as president, Tyler twice vetoed the congressional legislation that was made to renew the charter of this evil Second Bank of the United States.
on the issue of the Second Bank of the United States, Harrison, Tyler, and Jackson were of one mind. Congress renewed the bank's charter and sent it to Tyler, who vetoed it. Congress came to talk to the president and thought they had an agreement, rewrote the bill, and sent a new one to the president. Tyler vetoed the second recharter attempt also.
Tyler's veto killed this bank forever and finished it off. And then, highly powerful financial forces came into play in President Tyler's own political party to prevent him from seeking a second term as president. Later, ex-President Tyler was assassinated by the bankers, who were trying to divide the nation in two with the slavery issue and the Civil War. Tyler was against the Southern states seceding from the Union and against the Civil War. When this powerful ex-president of the United States from Virginia was elected to be a delegate to the first Confederate Congress, he was assassinated on his way traveling to take his seat. I believe ex-President Tyler and President Abraham Lincoln, working together, one from the North and one from the South, working together could have prevented the Civil War and from the Southern states seceding from the Union. After President Tyler came one of America's greatest presidents, but we rarely hear about him. His name is James Knox Polk. So to summarize, in a single term, that's just 4 years, President Polk took the following territory away from the European royal dynasty domination: the states Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, California, New Mexico, Arizona, and you might include Texas, which pretty much acted on its own, and the nations of Central America even: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. When any president takes territory that the Europeans occupied or colonized, the response is always assassination. Now, do you think the globalists might have a motive to poison President Polk? Polk was poisoned while in Washington, but quickly recovered after coming home. He lived only 103 days after leaving office, and he was poisoned a second time and assassinated after he had reached home. He was a very young president. The official story of Polk's death should be relegated to the graveyard of hoaxes, frauds, and fairy tales. But that's not all.
In 1846, President Polk approved the law restoring the independent treasury system, under which government funds were held in the treasury, and not in banks or other financial institutions. This law established independent treasury deposit offices, separate from private or state banks, to receive all government funds. This system operated totally in gold and silver coins. No central bank of issue and no national debt-based paper money. The Encyclopedia.
The nation did not borrow money from the Chinese. It did not borrow money from any bank. So doing it this way threatened the great Rothschild power structure. President Polk's debt-free monetary system remained in place until 1913, in which they stuck us with the Federal Reserve banking swindle. The $16 trillion debt of 2016 is nothing but a banker's swindle. We don't have to pay it, we don't have to repudiate it, we have to collect it from the banks and the corporations they finance with loans. It was President Polk that established the current border between Canada and the USA. And when the British refused his offer, he told them he would send U.S. troops and take British Columbia also. They quickly gave in. The next president, according to the same deathbed confession, General Zachary Taylor, was also assassinated with poison. He had said if while he was president anyone talked about secession from the Union, he would form up and lead an army after them and hang them like he did deserters and traitors during his time as a general in the Mexican-American War. So many people knew that Taylor had been assassinated that his body was exhumed for examination. However, the government pathologists came under extreme pressure from the mass media and did not properly conduct the tests for arsenic, thereby opening serious questions. Maybe they should have planned for several independent labs to do the testing. But it is likely that they did not realize that the assassins, after so many years, still had reason to cover up their crime. This is skull and bones raw power that still existed, had come into play, and had wrecked this investigation. President Franklin Pierce had served as Andrew Jackson's Speaker of the House, and had worked hard against the bankers at that time. He and his family fell victim to a very strange railroad train accident. The president's railroad car jumped the track and tumbled and rolled down an embankment. The railroad cars in front and behind the president's did not leave the tracks. The president and the first lady survived, but very mysteriously, their only child, a loved and treasured 11-year-old son, was horribly decapitated and assassinated during the wreck. The First Lady never recovered from the shock and blamed the death of their son on the fact that her husband was president. And she was right. The Franklin Pierce presidency was undermined and compromised by the death of their son. They had reason to fear for their own lives. The sinister and inhumane evil bankers had sent them a message. The same kind of message would be used again on other presidents.
The famous detective reminds us,
My name is Sherlock Holmes. It is my business to know what other people don't know.
The next president, James Buchanan, was also a subject of the before-mentioned deathbed confession. At Buchanan's inauguration party, the president and numerous guests were poisoned. Some of the president's own relatives died. But President Buchanan was given an antidote and recovered. Because, as president, Buchanan had done so many things to divide the people and split the nation on the slavery issue, that during and after his administration, the Civil War was called Buchanan's War. In shop windows across the country, colorful posters were displayed with this message. Buchanan was never against secession. Now note the contrast in attitude between Zachary Taylor, who was assassinated, and Buchanan, who was given the antidote. Before Lincoln took office, under President Buchanan, the South seceded from the Union. I believe that President Tyler from the South and President Lincoln from the North, working together, could have overcome the causes of the Civil War and saved 500,000 to 500,000 American lives. But again, both men were assassinated. Next, we see President Lincoln won the war. He refused bank loans and issued debt-free money called greenback dollars. When the war was over, Lincoln forgave the South and began Reconstruction to restore the Union. Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton hated the South as an enemy and opposed Lincoln's Reconstruction. He had conspired with Lincoln's assassins to kidnap the president and took extreme measures to convict the wrong people after the assassination, to convict little people, not the bankers who had been the ones who benefited from the assassination and actually participated in it. Some witnesses were murdered. You must be very careful of what many of the mainstream history books published and secretly financed by the globalists say. I believe my YouTube series, even though rare and unique, gives the truth about the Lincoln assassination, and I believe that the truth is out there for anyone who wants to discover it. The truth is out there. You can find it, especially today with the internet. The official story that we hear of Lincoln's assassination is a fairy tale. and don't believe it. It's the kind of thing that they tell you, and they tell people who don't do any research or looking. You have to investigate. When Lincoln was assassinated, President Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat, took office. He very strongly activated Lincoln's Reconstruction and the forgiveness of the South and the reuniting of the nation. He opposed the 14th Amendment. These actions by President Johnson opposed the globalist agenda.
He was a Democrat who ran with Lincoln on the National Union ticket. Johnson came to office as the Civil War concluded. The new president favored quick restoration of the seceded states to the Union. His plans did not give protection to the former slaves, and he came into conflict with the Republican-dominated Congress, culminating in his impeachment by the House of Representatives. The first American president to be impeached, he was acquitted in the Senate by one vote. The Encyclopedia.
President Johnson had gone head-to-head with Lincoln's Secretary of War, Stanton. And when he persisted in trying to dismiss Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, he was impeached by the House of Representatives and narrowly avoided conviction in the Senate and removal from office. Stanton is an extremely questionable character. President Johnson was heavily compromised. I believe that even though President Johnson lived, it was his presidency that was assassinated. This played into the hands of the globalists, and instead of trying to impeach him, Congress at this dangerous time in our history should have debated their differences like real heroes. A 13th Amendment to the Constitution against Bar Association lawyers holding government office that had been legally ratified by the required number of states just disappeared around this time. It just disappeared. The Slavery Amendment took its place. Many states published this 13th Amendment with the Constitution in their official documents. Many states did that. This amendment assures us equality. Equality is very important. A government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And not a government with two different levels of representation before the law. This is people who have titles of nobility can murder and rape and rob people who don't. That's the history of it. And it's not against the law when they do that. So if lawyers, or attorney at law, do they have a special privilege? Are they given something greater than equality that's different than what's given to the government of the people, by the people, and for the people? It's a very important principle, very important amendment that disappeared. Is attorney of law or esquire, is that a title of nobility? Does that make someone more equal than the rest of us? Does it give them privilege over us? Can they do something to us that if we did it to them it would be against the law, but if they do it to us, it's legal? Everyone is equal under the law. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's 6'4" and can play basketball, or that everybody can memorize a whole book just sitting down and reading it. That's not what equality means. Equality means equality under the law. Everybody's treated equally in the justice system. And when people have titles of nobility or special privileges like lawyers have before the court, that changes things from a government that is equal back to the old rule by special privileged people. And this is a very, very serious question to us today. Is attorney at law really a title of nobility? Do they have special privileges that they can do with the judge and the courts, and are there certain things that they can do called privileges that you and I don't have? And so the question becomes, who really controls the Bar Association? And I find that although people claim that the Bar Association gives a secret oath to the Europeans, it is more likely that the Bar Association in the United States follows a tradition, a long tradition, that goes back all the way to 1200 AD, and how the kings ruled, not how the government of the people, for the people, and by the people rules.
In the story, The Man with the Twisted Lip, Sherlock Holmes said, quote,
I confess that I have been blind as a mole. But it is better to learn wisdom late, than never to learn it at all.
President James A. Garfield was a monetary system expert, and therefore dangerous to the globalists. He was president for only 4 months, the second shortest tenure in office. He was shot in the back and then finished off by his doctors. If you are alert, you will find proof of this in almost any encyclopedia. Garfield came from a humble upbringing and during his lifetime worked hard labor. He knew the inside of the banker scam, and his presidency would have been a death to their agenda. That is why he was assassinated. His quotes on this subject are very enlightening, even today.
From the Sherlock Holmes story Silver blazes this conversation between Scotland Yard Inspector Gregory and the famous detective. Inspector Gregory asks,
Is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention?
To the curious incident of the dog in the night time.
The dog did nothing in the night time.
That was the curious incident.
Brilliantly observed Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes solves the case because the dog does not bark. The prosecutors do not bark. Why do not prosecutors indict or prosecute those persons who order, finance, and plan the assassination of presidents? Why always the lone nut theory? Why does the lawful 13th Amendment just disappear? The answer is that the courts have blended the form of the law jurisdiction and the equity form of jurisdiction. In a law court, the question is one of right or wrong. In an equity court, the only question before the court is who and by what means has the person been permitted to pass the temple bar. Is the person engaged in trade according to the rules set down by the banking cartel in corporate London? That is what an equity court determines. It is a legal tradition dating from around the year 1200. It was not the lawyers who made the lawful original 13th Amendment disappear. It was the banking cartel who operate as with a title of nobility or privilege. An editorial comment.
Ex-President Benjamin Harrison was also assassinated. However, this story is very complex. The British had invaded the South American country of Venezuela and taken over very rich gold mines there. They used the gold to manipulate the American economy, which at the time was based on gold and silver coins. Instead of going to war over this Monroe Doctrine violation, this conflict was subjected to arbitration, with ex-President Benjamin Harrison acting as the attorney for the USA and the country of Venezuela. The British won the arbitration by dirty trick corruption and cheating, and America was very angry about this treatment. So ex-President Harrison joined forces with the Tsar of Russia to establish an impartial arbitration court, and this would be at The Hague. Sometime after this, Harrison was assassinated with poison, and later the Tsar and his entire family were murdered for opposing the Jewish bankers. My YouTube video spells out the details, including the fact that the next president to be assassinated, William McKinley, had appointed Harrison to this World Arbitration Court task. President William McKinley was stockpiling gold for the nation. This action would prevent foreigners from controlling the volume of gold coin in circulation and causing panics, which are actually man-made inflations and depressions. He also put a limit on the number of British and Japanese ships, those were battleships, that may have been intended to be used against our country. Very unusual. Britain and Japan as allies against the USA. After being shot, President McKinley was finished off by his doctors. Lincoln, who was shot, was killed by his doctors probing for the bullet. Garfield was shot, but tried very hard to live until killed by his doctors. President JFK was shot from the front, and a small entrance bullet wound in his throat was destroyed by his doctors when they did a tracheotomy surgery on the dead president's body. The fall guy, Oswald, was stationed at the rear, so the removal of this evidence had to be pre-planned before the assassination with the intention of concealing the real shooter. Oswald, who was in a circumstance where emergency service should have saved his life, was instead likely finished off by his doctors in the hospital. He knew too much. The right rear side of the president's head was blown out, and his brains were scattered on the back of the limo. His wife jumped up to retrieve them. Now, if you draw a line from the right side back of the president's head through his throat, it points at the driver's seat. So, 4 presidents were shot, but 3 were actually killed by their doctors, and JFK, already dead, was driven into a prearranged mire. Today, gold and silver, these kind of commodities, are controlled by certain corporations, which are in turn part of the banking cartel. One, for example, is the SPDR Trust, the Spider Trust, they call it. Well, that controls all the gold transactions in the world, even when you just buy some gold at the store. That's totally controlled by them. Therefore, the original plan in the Constitution, where we use gold and silver money, will not work today because somebody else controls the gold and silver. And at that time, gold and silver were under discovery and nobody controlled it all. But today, that is different. So we're going to have to amend the Constitution in this aspect. This is very important to consider that today we couldn't use gold and silver coins. And so it's not really important what you use for money. You can use gold, you can use silver, and paper is not nearly as bad as they claim. It may be a lot more convenient, in fact, and people like it. So it doesn't matter what you use for money. What becomes important is who controls the volume of money in circulation. I can think of 3 choices. One would be the insane bankers, bloodlines that we have now. That's a really bad system. The second one would be the government, which would probably put too much power in government hands. And the third one is some way that the people control the volume of money in circulation through their representatives. That would be the best way, turning the power to control the volume of money in circulation over to the people. And it doesn't matter whether you use gold, silver, or paper. It's the control of the volume of money in circulation that makes the difference. When President William McKinley was assassinated, Vice President Teddy Roosevelt took over. he very seriously regarded the idea of representing the people, representing the little guys, representing the shopkeepers and their interests. He became the trust buster and wrecked Rothschild agent J.P. Morgan's empire. But the president did not clearly understand that if you left the bankers with the power to control deposits, they would soon buy it all back again. Popular Teddy Roosevelt was forced by his own political party, with secret money injected, not to run for president again. However, when President Taft, a skull and bones globalist, failed to represent the interests of the people, the very popular President Teddy formed a third party and ran for president independently. He would have defeated both Taft and Woodrow Wilson, but he was shot and seriously wounded during the campaign. Teddy stated that he knew that Presidents Garfield and McKinley had been killed by their doctors, and Roosevelt took deliberate action to avoid this. However, his son and a nephew, it appears, had been murdered while serving in the military. Teddy had given the globalist motive. These deaths very strongly affected him. Maybe he had private information that although these two deaths were associated with the military service, the young men had been murdered as a message to Roosevelt, intended to prevent him from running for the presidency again. Teddy Roosevelt, only 60 years old and extremely popular with the American people, was beginning plans to run and likely would have won the 1920 presidential election. He died suddenly and mysteriously, with no history of heart trouble. This after a 6-week hospital stay where there was a diagnosis of inflammatory rheumatism. Then, after returning home 2 weeks later, he died in his sleep. President Roosevelt was poisoned with arsenic, and an aide-de-camp sleeping in the next room made sure he was dead before summoning doctors. He did not have a history of heart trouble or life-ending illness, but he did have a history of fighting and defeating the globalist agenda.
No post-mortem was performed on President Teddy Roosevelt. The clinical inconclusive claim of 3 doctors who had treated him was that death had come from a previously unknown coronary occlusion, and maybe by a blood clot. They believed that the patient's recent attack of inflammatory rheumatism had not directly contributed to his death. The Encyclopedia.
President TR was a clear target for those who considered him dangerous to their power, and who are known for their ruthlessness and treachery. They shot him, they killed 2 young relatives, and when that failed to stop him, they poisoned him.
Sherlock Holmes clarifies this complex concept for us.
How often have I said to you, that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
President Woodrow Wilson became president and signed the Federal Reserve Act, allowing the European banking cartel to take over the nation's money and credit. President Wilson was blackmailed because of an extramarital affair, and also the peace president who secretly owned profitable stock in munitions corporations. However, during his lifetime, so many presidents were assassinated who opposed the bankers, in which the justice system fizzled, he reasonably feared for his life and the lives of those of his family members. You should read President Wilson's quote against the Federal Reserve. If President Wilson did not voluntarily and willingly signed the Federal Reserve Act into law, if he was threatened, his life was in danger if he did not sign it. That means that the Federal Reserve Act is not legal. It has no lawful foundation. It was achieved by threat of assassination and by threat of physical harm. That would be an unlawful contract between the president and the people. The next president, Warren G. Harding, with the flick of a pen, could have and would have terminated the infant Federal Reserve Bank. However, when blackmail, false accusations, and lies of crimes and corruption failed to stick to this president, he was poisoned by a highly decorated, highly placed Navy admiral, medical doctor named Boone. One source said Boone claimed to be a descendant of the famous frontiersman Daniel Boone. But I found no such person in Daniel Boone's family tree. This highly decorated military doctor was a well-placed spy and a globalist medical assassin, in my humble opinion. The assassination of President Harding brought Vice President Calvin Coolidge into office. President Coolidge said, "All the power of the presidency left him with the death of one of his sons." The young boy got a blister on his heel while playing tennis on the White House court. And under the care of Dr. Boone, the spy assassin, the boy died of strep infection. I believe that President Coolidge feared that they would also murder his other son and get away with it. And so the Federal Reserve stayed with us. President Jackson knew this kind of bank was attacking the government and trying to take it over. And so President Jackson killed it, and he was quite proud of having killed it. But today, and in Wilson's time, fear haunted the White House. And that's how the Federal Reserve Bank got stuck to us, because fear is haunting the White House. The next president of the United States was Herbert Hoover. He was a Bohemian Grove globalist puppet. And FDR's mother was a Jew, if you know the Ashkenazi rule. So was Churchill's mother. And Eisenhower was called a crypto-Jew at West Point. Does this surprise you? Why are all these heads of the Federal Reserve Zionist Israeli promoter Jews? Why do they even call themselves Jews when they are atheists? Are they really Jews? Do they have the right DNA? The Jewish prophet Isaiah condemns their behavior. 6 months before his assassination, JFK, by executive order, issued $4.3 billion in debt-free Red Seal Treasury notes. This action by JFK was well on its way to killing the Federal Reserve's power like a shot between the eyes. On the airplane flying back from Dallas on the day of the assassination, new President Lyndon Johnson rescinded JFK's executive order. Just in case you think JFK's executive order was not important to the government of, for, and by the people, what was the rush that made Johnson act so quickly? Johnson and FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover knew about the assassination of JFK before it took place. President Richard Nixon was placed in a catch-22. The phrase, catch-22, was entered into the English language, referring to a type of unsolvable logic puzzle, sometimes called a double bind. CIA and Mossad agents got themselves caught burglarizing the other political party's headquarters. Nixon did not order it, nor did he know about it before it took place, only after it happened. This gambit attack upon the country was very harmful to the nation, to both political parties, to the presidency, and to the President Nixon personally. No one would believe President Nixon or that his political party were not involved in this type of crime against the political opposition. This is the double bind of the catch-22, the unsolvable puzzle thrown into the lap of the sitting president. Nixon, once it formed, did everything proper. And as president, he had the authority to obstruct the damage this attack was causing. He tried to make it go away. But the banker-controlled and owned American mass media kept accusing Nixon and hammering away at cover-up, making use of the typical catch-22 double bind. The fact that the press had more access to the people than any president and falsely appeared to be impartial made the playing field very unlevel. The people were given a choice. They could believe their president, or they could believe a high-powered propaganda campaign bombardment on their own government by foreigners who controlled the press. The people made the wrong choice. Can we say that we have freedom of the press if the press is all corporations that have been bought by a banking cartel who swindles us from our money and uses our money to buy up our press and then only tell us what they want us to hear? Not freedom of the press. That can't be freedom of the press. You can't have a monopoly ownership of the press and call it freedom of the press. Monopolies aren't freedom. Nixon resigned from the presidency because of bad public opinion manufactured against him. He was never convicted of any crime. Why didn't they kill Nixon? Nixon had knowingly taken action that led to the resignation of an Israeli prime minister. So tit for tat justice. They forced him to resign in the same way. Nixon had opposed their agenda after winning re-election by the highest popular vote in history. He was not assassinated, but his name and reputation were.
Having gathered these facts, Watson, I smoked several pipes over them, trying to separate those which were crucial from others which were merely incidental.
So advised us Sherlock Holmes in the story The Crooked Man.
President Ronald Reagan was a very popular actor. Everyone loved for the heroes he played in the movies. He was put into a faked assassination scenario after holding office for just 69 days. He was denied access to the press and to the people and constantly watched over like a prisoner. The government was taken over by Skull and Bones, while Reagan was kept as a front man with no power, just a pretty face to placate the people. As a master actor, Reagan tried to signal to the American people that he was not in charge by pretending to fall asleep at major public events. He feared for his life. My YouTube.com video recounts my observations surrounding the details of the day he was shot by a flechette dart, not an exploding bullet used by the accused assassin.
It has long been an axiom of mine that the little things are infinitely the most important.
Sherlock Holmes quote from A Case of Identity.
A central bank, also called a reserve bank, or monetary authority, is an institution that manages a state's currency, money supply, and interest rates. Central banks also usually oversee the commercial banking system of their respective countries. In contrast to a commercial bank, a central bank possesses a monopoly on increasing the monetary base in the state, and usually also prints the national currency, which usually serves as the state's legal tender. The primary function of a central bank is to control the nation's money supply and monetary policy, through active duties such as 1. Managing interest rates, 2. Setting the reserve requirement, and 3. Acting as a lender of last resort to the banking sector during times of bank insolvency or financial crisis. Central banks usually also have supervisory powers, intended to prevent bank runs and to reduce the risk that commercial banks and other financial institutions engage in reckless or fraudulent behavior. Central banks in most developed nations are institutionally designed to be independent from political interference. Still, limited control by the executive and legislative bodies usually exists. The U.S. Federal Reserve Bank acts in total secrecy and likely loans itself and its allies more money than it does to our government. Central banks create money out of nothing by issuing interest-free currency notes and selling them to the public or to the government in exchange for interest-bearing assets such as treasury bills, treasury notes, and treasury bonds. When a central bank wishes to purchase more bonds than their respective national governments make available, they may purchase private bonds or assets denominated in foreign currencies by foreign corporations and agencies.
It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly one begins to twist facts to suit theories, instead of theories to suit facts.
This is a Sherlock Holmes quote from the story A Scandal in Bohemia.
So what does it mean to you that the central bank, called the Federal Reserve, controls the nation's currency, the money supply, interest rates, and all of the other banks? By buying $100 bills for 4 cents each, or just entering numbers into the computer, this private business can give itself large sums of real money. It can spend its swag by loaning it to friends, to its allies, to its controlled agents, and to its infiltrators. They are all your bailout enemies. It controls the money supply. That is the volume of money in circulation. Therefore, anytime it wants, it can create inflation, making money worthless and the price of everything you want to buy go up, or it can create a depression like America's Great Depression, where Americans stood in line for bread. There were bread lines. People stood in line for food. The Federal Reserve, a private business, can threaten the U.S. Congress or the President with its power and make them obey or face unhappy constituents. They can control the interest rates so as to dictate when you can buy a car, or when you can buy a house, or maybe when you can take a vacation. They exercise control over all the other banks, and history shows that over time they bankrupted and took over banks and loan agencies that greatly benefited the people, such as the early state farm banks used by the farmers and the savings and loan industry. The Fed can secretly loan itself a great deal more money than the government will spend on the people and the nation. They could give money to foreign corporations while passing the bill off onto our national debt. It is as if they have your credit card. They spend and charge all they want, and you get the bill. But in this case, the bill does not tell you what they bought with your credit card. That is a secret. That is what it means that the government does not audit the Fed.
The essence of banking was once explained by Sir Josiah Stamp, a former president of the Bank of England.
The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in inequity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them but leave them the power to create money, and, with a flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. Take this great power away from them and all great fortunes like mine will disappear, for then this would be a better and happier world to live in. But, if you want to continue to be the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit.
Yes, if you want to continue to be the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit.
Yes, if you want to continue to be the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let bankers continue to create money and control credit.
They create money out of nothing, out of nothing, out of nothing, out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented.
The Federal Reserve is a banker's swindle, a debt-based monetary system. They enslaved the nation and turned the people into slaves by taking over their major institutions. They take over their education, their military, their press, everything. They take over everything. They just simply buy it, or buy people who go and infiltrate or blackmail and threaten people who are already in those positions. They take over those positions by hiring people to spy on and blackmail the representatives, the people that are supposed to be doing a job. However, Presidents Jackson, Polk, Lincoln, and Kennedy gave us a debt-free money system. Debt-free. No money borrowed from any bank and no national debt. The nation cannot go bankrupt. It cannot crash. It's very easy to take this power away from the evil bankers. A president can do it with the flick of a pen. Therefore, in order to keep their wealth and their power, they assassinate our leaders. It's likely these dynasties do not even consider our leaders to be human beings. They call them livestock, or they call them goy. They have done the same thing for the same reason to popes, as well as to presidents, as my YouTube.com video demonstrates.
Isaiah the wonderful Jewish prophet defined our mission.
To open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house.
The Old Testament Bible, Isaiah chapter 42 verse 7.
Together we can end the New World Order and its evil banking power that is trying to enslave the world. The world will be a happier place for all. We just have to intelligently demand our leaders give us debt-free money. Our leaders cannot do this by themselves. The ones that have tried were murdered. But if the people of the world demand this of their various governments and demonstrate that they know the truth, the deception will end. The people will control the volume of money in circulation, and the money will serve to provide food, homes, education, safety, and jobs that all the people in the world, no matter what country, race, or religion, want, and want for their families.
Nothing clears up a case so much as stating it to another person,
said Sherlock Holmes in the story, Silver Blaze.
Tell your friends about this video series. I offer only my observation, intuition, and opinion, so feel free to form your own and even disagree. I will answer questions or read all your comments. My email and website are inside the videos. There are no ads, no requests for donations, and the video series is to remain in public domain. I receive zero income from it. This is a news and educational report, and it only circulates by you telling other people about it. So we need you to tell your friends and people you contact to watch this video series. Join with us in trying to discover the truth.
Sherlock Holmes tells us to be more observant.
The world is full of obvious things, which nobody by any chance ever observes.
The people need to intelligently demand debt-free money.